Thank you, people, for joining us for what is actually the opening session of VivaTech 2019. Thank you for choosing us instead of President Macron, who is actually visiting VivaTech right now. And you're right, because we're going to be discussing a very critical topic, which is the way African integration may be some kind of game-changing factor when it comes to African startups. And we're going to be discussing it thanks to three brilliant people, brilliant entrepreneurs who are showcasing poster childs, in fact, of the new generation of African entrepreneurship, and who are showcasing the way the continent, Africa, maybe not as a whole, but in many, many sports, in more and more sports parts of it, is becoming a startup continent. First of all, maybe, gentlemen, because I have the privilege of moderating the panel and having work of it, and I'm knowing your companies, but maybe not everyone in the audience know you. Could you make us a little pitch about what you're doing and in how many countries you're operating in Africa? Who wants to start? Yannick, maybe.
Well, thank you. So my name is Yannick Lefang. I'm the founder of Cassie Insight, a consumer insight company covering 10 countries in Africa. I also recently joined GEBEYA as their CFO. Thank you.
Amadou?
Yes, we have a company called GEBEYA, which is in Ethiopia, Kenya, Senegal recently. We're also in the US and the UK. We're a talent infrastructure company, so we help young people skill up and we place them up for the global marketplace.
And Bosun?
Yes, so CCHUB is the first technology innovation center in Nigeria. So beyond the fact that we incubate technology startups, we also invest in them. But I think most importantly, we work with governments and civil society organizations to find really, really interesting ways to use technology to solve problems in the society. We operate out of Lagos, Abuja, and recently we set up a design lab in Kigali in Rwanda.
Rwanda, which is a very fast-developing country. It's a very interesting one. So let's focus on our topic, which is African integration. We are being told that the ratification of the AFCTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, by several countries is going to be some kind of game-changing factor for African governments and for the whole continent. But we don't know, from a European point of view, we don't know quite well its impact here in Europe. You're very much closer than us from this situation. What did you already see change, or what do you expect to see changing in a few months from now, thanks to this ratification in your country's ecosystem? Bosun, what are you seeing coming?
I think the starting point is for people to understand that most of the time when you think of Africa, you think of all the challenges on the continent. But I think what people need to get is that's the last frontier. Those challenges are opportunities to actually create wealth and create value, which means that the technology that we all see and we get excited about today can actually become a major part of how we build the future of Africa. So technology can be part of how we build education, for instance. Or we all know that there's deficit of infrastructure on the continent.
Of course.
Which means if Africa is building infrastructure, we're actually building smart infrastructure, because we're not starting from legacy problems. So like say the West, you already have your infrastructure. To make them smart, you have to think of what to do with the old ones. This is not the case with Africa. So we have the opportunity to actually build smart infrastructure. But one thing that's been the way of Africa is actually the resources. So the level of resources in the different countries varies. And the implication of that is that countries can't grow fast enough. But with this agreement, it means that we can leverage resources in Ethiopia to actually develop faster in Nigeria, or we can leverage the talent in Nigeria to help Rwanda, Uganda, even Kenya to develop really, really fast. So I think the world needs to pay attention to this agreement, because it's going to become a game changer.
Obviously. What do you think of it, Amadou? What is going to be changing in your field, which is the rise of African tech talents, in fact?
So three things. One is the movement of people, right?
Yeah.
And second is the one common currency. Let me give you two quick examples. In Ethiopia, any African citizen now can actually get a visa on arrival, which was never heard before. Because the African Union is in Ethiopia, it facilitated all of that. So all the developers or trainers who come to Ethiopia to help us train people, they actually come in and get the visa on arrival. Second thing, Bosun mentioned, for example, the fact that Ethiopian can provide services to Nigeria. We have Nigerian companies who hire our developers in Ethiopia, but the only problem is how do they pay them? Because they have the Naira, they need to buy in dollars and send it over to Ethiopia. So the currency part is what I'm waiting for. I think the movement of people is already happening. I think it's more of the currency right now.
Okay. And for you, Yannick, your company is operating in already 10 African countries. So obviously you've got a very accurate point of view about such topics.
Well, I think for me, what you're going to see happening is obviously the opening of a $1.3 trillion market, which is the African market as a whole. And as both Amadou and Bosun mentioned, movement of people is going to be key. So you can leverage resources, human capital now across the continent. Being able to offer your service at a very competitive price. Being able to, again, acquire knowledge or resources now with less tariff, for example. So I think what we're going to see is obviously the opening of a bigger market. And more business within the continent, but also between the continent and the rest of the world.
As in every case of a trade agreement, the ratification is made by governments, but the impact is going to be on companies. Are you talking with the governments? Are they taking into consideration your company's needs? How is it doing?
I think we live in an age where companies naturally think of internationalization.
Obviously.
And this has been a major problem for us on
You're born global.
We're born
Your
global.
companies are born global.
And when you look at, say, technology development in, say, Europe, if a startup is starting up in France, they see the entire European market as their market. In Africa, this used to be a problem because when you start, you're first thinking, I'm a Nigerian company, I want to bid for Nigeria first. If I conquer Nigeria, then I can scale. And part of that, it's a mindset thing because naturally it doesn't come to you automatic that as a Nigerian business, you can do business in Ghana, in Ethiopia. But with this agreement, I think companies are just waiting for it to happen. And I think whether we talk to the government or not, whether they listen to us or not, I think what's going to end up happening is that companies will shape the agenda.
Yeah, naturally widening the horizons of entrepreneurs. Do you agree, Amadou, Yannick?
Because entrepreneurs, we like disruption. We probably even don't like regulation much.
Yes.
We have a tendency of affecting what...
It's a common fact in every continent,
exactly.
No idea.
You see what Uber has done, right? They're battling every government. So in that in mind, one of the problems we have in Africa is when even investors want to invest in you, is how you're going to scale. Before, like Bosun said, you're in Nigeria, you don't know how to go to Cameroon. You don't know how to go to Ethiopia. But now, because of this regulation, it allows now to think, okay, now I can move people, I can move services, I can move money around. So it's a tremendous opportunity right now for African entrepreneurs.
So tremendous opportunity. You agree, obviously, Yannick?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen, for once, our political leadership in Africa, really pushing this agenda forward. So I think the agreement is going to be ratified. I think countries will start to implement it. We will see, obviously, not every country is going to do it at the same pace, but I think there's definitely will today, from a political point of view to the businesses in the company, to really move this agenda forward.
But when your ecosystem changes that much, you need to adapt yourself to be compliant with new regulations, or maybe to seize as many opportunities as possible. What kind of changes are you preparing in your own companies to take those tremendous opportunities Amadou was talking about?
Absolutely. So CCHUB launched the Design Lab in Kigali in February this year.
If people don't know Rwanda, you should go in this country because
it's a fantastic success story, by the way. So we launched our lab in February, and that was the first time we were leaving Nigeria for another country. And Nigeria is a very peculiar country. So the way you do business in Nigeria is not the way you do business, I think, in
But
Rwanda.
when you do business in Nigeria, you're able to do business elsewhere.
Anywhere in the world. So I think when we started, for us, it was clear that, things like taxation, for instance, is an important thing to take into consideration. Because in Rwanda, they're very, very serious about their taxation, which is how they're able to provide the right services, obviously, to businesses. So I think it was important that we had people locally with a solid understanding of the business environment to help us. But I also think Rwanda is actually quite unique as well, because the government is quite welcoming. So the Rwanda Development Board was quite supportive in the process. Yes. I think the Ministry of ICT
it's a very stable country when it comes to the economic context, in fact.
Absolutely, and I think countries like that will become the examples that other countries in Africa will emulate in terms of how do you welcome, young businesses that are trying to come in. I know Ethiopia is also trying to do quite a lot of exciting things. From the information I have, Ethiopia is now the second country in Africa to have a Ministry of ICT and Innovation. Yeah. I think the first was Rwanda. So I think governments would need to learn, but businesses would also need to be open to opportunities around scaling. And I think one other thing in the ecosystem that is currently weak that we need to build is how do you support scale-ups? I think the focus has been more on how do you support startups, which is a totally different ballgame.
Yes, yes. We know that in France as well. Yeah. Scale-ups are of the essence. Amadou, how are you adapting?
Yeah, so two things. One, legal. Anything around intellectual property.
Yeah. Right? Oh, huge matter.
Yeah, so we have lawyers in Senegal talking to a lawyer in the US, talking to a lawyer in Ethiopia to figure out, because when you scale your company...
And you have a huge amount of legal fees.
Exactly. So that's one. Yeah, so that's one. The second is the more Pan-African team. Because most of us, for example, when I first started GEBEYA, we had an Ethiopian team, right? But now we diversified. Thanks, Yannick is joining us, and he's more international. He's from Cameroon. So having a more international, more Pan-African team would also, we're preparing for that as well.
How do you create a common Pan-African corporate culture? It's a very interesting topic. What are the roadblocks you've been meeting?
The good news is there's a lot of people in the diaspora who wants to come back.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I
Talents
really look at first.
Who went working overseas and who want to get back.
Come back. Those are the ones you want, because the one local is so contextual that they may not see the global vision that you have. So that's how I see it so far. Yeah.
It's a very interesting dynamic. Yannick, what is your point of view about, and what are your experience when it comes to adaptation?
Yes, so I think for us, because we started the company with the idea of providing consumer insight across the continent, we've always had the view that we needed to be in more than one country because we wanted to cover more than one countries. So having talent from different countries can be challenging, but as well very exciting, because you bring very different point of view from East Africa to West Africa, and you have to kind of learn how to leverage different skill set to build your company and to build a culture. And as doing that, you're also building a regional Pan-African corporate culture and learning how to use all these different human capital from these different countries.
I've got for you guys a very interesting question from the audience, thanks to Slido. Keep on using it for this panel and the next ones. The question is, you mentioned smart infrastructure. What is the building stone of a smart infrastructure, and how do you perceive a smart infrastructure? Maybe it was Bosun, so you're the first one to answer, but every one of you is going to be answering, guys.
I think that's a very good question. So for smart infrastructure, the core of it obviously is connectivity. And we know that we live in a world today where more than ever before, humans are more connected. But also, interestingly, we're even more connected to machines, and machines are connected as well. I know people would always talk about the level of connectivity across Africa as that being a challenge to smart infrastructure, but I don't think so. If you remember that Africa is one of the continents with the highest number of, with a growing number of mobile penetration.
Yes.
And with mobile penetration, we're also seeing mobile internet, which means more and more people actually carry devices that can connect them to services. And the implication of that is that compared to so many other markets, if you think of things like WhatsApp, for instance, WhatsApp blew up in Africa even before Europe. So we have that tremendous opportunity to provide services to people on the go. And I mentioned this earlier, because there's deficit of infrastructure in Africa, it means that when we're building, we have the opportunity to be more thoughtful around how we build, around how citizens can actually access the infrastructure that we build. So I think the big feature for Africa is going to be around smart infrastructure. Companies that are smart are already positioning for it. There's quite a lot of German companies setting up all across Africa now. Volkswagen have serious presence in Rwanda, for instance, and they're also building a Uber-like solution also in Rwanda that they're looking to scale across the whole continent. And so I think there's massive opportunity for smart infrastructure.
And when it comes to mobile and banking, Africa is moving even faster than Europe at the moment when it comes to mobile payment. Amadou, Yannick, yeah.
So two things of smart infrastructure. One is, for example, around drone technology.
Yeah.
So Rwanda is the first country that has a drone port that distributes blood across the country.
It's a huge
so why
development.
are we spending so much money building roads to these rural areas, right, for certain things?
To find new solutions to the infrastructure problem we've been discussing.
Right. Right, so that's the first one. The other one is anything that has to do with, for me, blockchain technology, not on the cryptocurrency side, but more on the distributed model. For example, no government
for
in Africa,
services, financial insurance services.
no, even further, because no government in Africa can afford to build massive data centers.
That's right.
But we have massive cell phones in Africa. Why can't we leverage some technology around that? So we're just using what's already working and adding on top of it. That's why I understand by smart infrastructure.
Yannick, something to add about smart infrastructure?
Not about the technology side of it, but the consumer side of it. As long as it meets the consumer needs, it's fine. So any smart infrastructure, smart technology, I think at the end of the day, we need to get to really solving meaningful problems that consumers have on the continent.
We are nearing the end already of this panel, but you've been talking about tremendous opportunities. If you may share with us a few of your current dreams, the next challenges you're preparing for, the next big goal, the next big thing for your company. What is it? Bosun.
I think for me, I'm spending more time in finding ways to unleash science on Africa. I think Africa needs to take science more seriously. And one of the ways in which I'm working to enable that is to get young people exposed to science at very young age. So I've started a new initiative which is called STEM Cafe. So it's literally a play space for young people to come and play with science and technology. And the whole concept is that in the process of playing with science and technology, they get used to creating, they get used to the concept of actually becoming a problem solver. And at the end of the day, in probably 10, 15 years' time, some of the best scientists in the world will come from Africa.
I hope so for you, for every one of you. Yannick, your next big thing.
Well, I think, again, combining technology and looking at some of our core issues on the continent and making sure that we're actually bridging, we're bridging solutions to actual problems. So like I said, to me, it's innovation from within. That's to me the next big thing where you actually really try to leverage tools and technology, human capital to do that. And I'm very excited about the work that Bosun or even GEBEYA is doing with empowering human capital, because that's going to be key.
And Amadou, the last words are going to be for you.
Yeah, so the same line. The dream is just to make Africa more competitive around technology, because I think we've lost a few battles already, right? So I think that this digital transformation is really where we want to focus on making in the next 20, 30 years. If you want to find the best scientists, the best engineers in the world, you find them in Africa. And I think we have that.
I was talking about poster childs of African entrepreneurship. They delivered. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing those experience and expertise with us.